Welcome back to the Moynihan Report. I'm your host, Michael Moynihan, and we got a good one today. I mean, I always say that, but I think this is a good one. You know why? Because I'm consistently angry about one thing that always brings me back to another time in New York City. I'm going to tell you a very, very brief story. I was getting on the subway the other day, and those of you who listen to the Fifth Column podcast know I talk about this all the time. And in the subway, there is a gate. So if you don't live in New York, you know you can get through this gate if you have a trolley or a what do you call it? I was going to say pram, like I'm English or something. Stroller is the word that I was looking for, not a pram. But this gate was open. And this is often open, and not a single person except for me paid, right? Everyone's walking through it. But the crazy thing that made me really, really angry is that there was a guard, not a cop, but a guard. And so I looked this up. Allied Universal is the name of the company. And the city has a $35 million contract with them. And everywhere you go, they're letting people through. So not only are we losing $1 billion, $800 million a year to fare evasion in New York, we're actually paying more to have people watch them, to have people open the door for them. And so why am I saying this? Well, back in the 90s, late 90s, when I moved to New York, I had a friend that producer Trace knows too, I think, who got arrested for fare evasion, and then another person who was arrested for walking between cars. And this was the days of broken windows policing. You've probably heard that, the Giuliani days where people were cracking down on quality of life. Oh, we have a technical issue. Before we started this, we already started it, and I was telling this great long story that I just don't have it in me to tell you again. But New York used to be a horrible hellhole. I mean, it's a great city, but there was a lot of crime back in the day. But what happened? So if you know about broken windows policing, the other thing you know is that everyone said it worked, and this is the thing that brought us back from the brink, and we're going to get back to that phrase. And then some other people came along and said, hey, you know what? Malcolm Gladwell, these guys said, it wasn't that. So what was it? Because in 1992, I think was the peak, maybe 93, more murders than, Baghdad. It was a really bad time in New York. And that was the brink. But we came back from the brink in this city, and it changed. So how the hell did it happen? This is the book that has the answers. I'm really excited about it because it has all this stuff that no one talks about anymore. Back from the brink, inside the NYPD in New York City's extraordinary 1990s crime drop from Peter Moskos, who was a cop in Baltimore, then went to Harvard, now is a professor at John Jay, and he's far more interesting than me. Peter Moskos, welcome to the show. How did we come back from the brink? I know, can I start with a huge question like that?
You can. I just want to repeat that the way you told that story the first time.
It was so good.
It was good.
It was going to win an Oscar. Do we get Oscars for podcasts? I don't know, whatever the hell it was. It was great. But the second time was not as good. So,
it's hard to bottle that magic.
Back from the brink, I mean, give us a sense, just to start, of how bad it was in New York. Let's say like 1988 to like 1992, which seemed to be the thickest, most violent years, crack epidemic, et cetera. Give me a sense of like how bad it actually was in New York.
It was 1990 was the most violent year, 260 odd murders in that 1 year. By comparison, we'll probably be under 300 this year.
Yeah.
But I want to go back a little bit further because the real nadir of the city might have been 1975. Oh yeah. With the near bankruptcy, Ford City dropped dead.
Yeah.
Because thousands of municipal employees, including 5,000 police officers, were laid off. Yeah. The city could not make payroll.
Yeah.
That scarred the city and scarred the police department. It was followed immediately by a sanitation strike, so there's garbage piling up in the streets. So you've got basically after that 15, 20 years of just trying to get the city back together.
So not the most violent time, but as far as dysfunction is concerned,
it was still pretty violent.
Yeah, it's still pretty violent too, yeah.
Robberies peaked in 1980 for what it's worth, more than 1990. Yeah, crime did go up and crime did go down a bit and life went on, but that attitude that, well, crime goes up sometimes it goes down, and life goes on. That was sort of the defeatist attitude in terms of crime prevention. And you get many of the same arguments you did today, people talking about root causes. Then it was all about drug treatment, ending poverty, ending racism. None of that happened in the 90s.
But you do point out in the book, when you have the worst moments in New York City, the worst years for this, the things that you would believe to be the proximate causes, like poverty and like incarceration, you're saying, well, fewer people are being incarcerated. Poverty isn't, going up in a huge way, but crime is. So there was kind of this confusion amongst people of trying to kind of decipher why this was happening, right?
Yeah, though no one says poverty is the proximate cause. The proximate cause is someone gets on the subway with a gun.
Yes,
But because it's important to address those proximate causes
yeah.
and not the root causes.
Yeah,
address
yeah.
root causes because they're important.
Yeah.
But they're not violence prevention strategies.
Yeah.
Yes, you had crack come in, and that decimated parts of the city, and that peaked in 1990. So you see that going on. But no one believed that we could drastically reduce crime. Cut it in half, and then cut it in half again.
Yeah.
Also, the city was losing population. People were leaving because for many it was a miserable place to be, and even people who lived in better neighborhoods, how many times do you have to be mugged before you leave?
Yeah.
Cars were broken into. The city towed away 100,000 abandoned cars one year. Most of those were probably stolen. But I like to imagine people just getting up and leaving.
It's
leaving
also
their
bad
car
if 100,000 or 90,000 were stolen. I can't imagine anyone at that time hearing me today saying, I live in Bed-Stuy. That was not a place that I would live. Crown Heights, which you have a chapter on, we'll get to that.
Even in 2000, I said I don't want to live in Fort Greene because I don't want to hear gunshots.
Yeah, no, that was like the crack kind of like Fort Greene Park and the projects down there. It was a rough neighborhood, and now you can't get something under like $4 million if you're buying, right?
A lot of people became rich on property in some of the most violent neighborhoods back then. Now, also keep in mind, I first visited the city in 1988 as a high school senior.
Because you're from Chicago.
Yeah. I grew up in Evanston, Chicago born. And I loved the city back then, arguably at its worst. There still was. I said one day I want to live there. Yeah. And I have.
What year was that?
In 1988, I first visited. And then I was in New Jersey at Princeton for undergrad. So I regularly came to the city from 89 to 94 when I graduated.
What was that like, just kind of generally the feeling you got in the city? Because, there's obviously an enormous amount of excitement. It is an exciting place. It is a gritty place. But it's also a terrifying place, an incredibly violent place. And, I once wrote a piece kind of against nostalgia. People say, Times Square was Disneyfied. It's like, well, Disneyfied, but the other option was murders back in the day. Did you have a sense that, like, this is a place that needs to change? Or was it just kind of the excitement of youth and seeing, like, this is a bizarro world of both excitement and violence?
Probably the latter, but other cities follow the same trajectory. I think there was the sense that we can't do anything. The government's ineffective, that society is messed up. I don't think people had that vision, or as the far left likes to say, the imagination to imagine that things could be better.
Yeah.
That idea of Times Square, Gretchen Dykstra is one of the people I interview in my book, and she ran the Times Square Business Improvement District.
Yeah.
The group that Disneyfied and she directly addresses that and says, first of all, we didn't Disneyfy Times Square, but she says there's a tendency to romanticize the gutter. Yeah. And she says Times Square is better than it's ever been right now, and just stop thinking that those bad old days were so great.
Yeah, the same is true of neighborhoods. City has changed so dramatically, but let's zip forward just for a minute to talk about the perceptions of New York today. I'm always hit with statistics when I tell people stories about the subway, and I attract really bad attention on subways. I don't know what it is about me. I try to be quiet, and somehow it follows me. And I always point out that these are not things that can be quantified by police statistics. Feelings of dread, feelings that the guy running through the subway screaming at the top. No one's calling the cops when they get off the subway. Oh, there was a guy, who pulled his dick out or something and is screaming, usually doesn't get a police call. So you get these numbers that today, it's fine, right? And you usually comparison is 1990 or 91 or 92 and say, oh, it's so much better than then. Is there a tendency now, and we see this with Trump in DC in the federalizing of the DC police force and, the violence that Trump says? I saw a piece today in the Washington Post said, well, the numbers tell a very different stories. And then, of course, they compare it to something from the 1980s or 90s. The perceptions that people have of this city, you live here, you've lived here for a long time. Is it wrong or, I don't know, kind of, dishonest for me to talk about how I think the subway is a mess? Because the numbers don't bear it out. This is what people tell me all the time.
Perceptions do. I mean, sometimes perceptions are crazy, but
Yeah.
you don't look like a crazy guy.
I mean-
even though you attract crazy on the subway.
Yeah.
Perceptions are rooted in reality at some level. And you do have to be very leery of crime statistics because the quality of life stuff is hard to measure. And sometimes you might have to tell the public that actually, check out, and now going back to 1991, but check out Bryant Park. It's new and improved. Everyone thought that couldn't be done. Times Square is now safe to walk around, people said. And the subways did get a lot safer for many years
safer.
until they
Until they
got
regressed a bit, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? These things, and ultimately, and back from the Brink, I think one of the points is these things just don't happen. It's not magic. It's not some tide going in or out or something in the air. I distinctly remember when the Second Avenue subway opened up, which 16, 17?
Yeah, it sort of opened up, yeah.
I went and visited it because I like cities and subways. And I went to my class where I was teaching a bunch of ranking cops and told this transit cop, Steve Hill, who's also in Back from the Brink, he just retired after 33 years. I said, Second Avenue subway is beautiful. And he says, Pete, it's going to be the Taj Mahal of homeless shelters.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you mean? And he told me that they'd just been given orders from above, and I've never been able to find them in writing, but I assume from Mayor de Blasio's office to stop enforcing subway rules, to stop enforcing rules against loitering, against being outstretched on seats, against begging on the train, rules that they fought long and hard to get implemented in. That year there was one murder on the subway. The year before there were 0, and then it started going up every year until it hit the double digits. And it was, in effect, the city, breaking their own windows and then seeing what happens.
So you've been a cop. You were a cop in Baltimore, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that too. But you've been a cop. You're an academic. You've been deep in this stuff. You've gone through the numbers. You've actually. The great thing about this book is just the sheer number of cops that you talk to and people that are involved in this stuff. But when you look at this stuff, do you think that general premise of broken windows policing, because it was sort of, amongst the chattering classes, kind of discredited for a while. If you said, that was...
I would go so far as to say it's a toxic term now.
A toxic term now, right? I mean, It strikes me that even if it didn't have this kind of, it wasn't the panacea for everything, the general idea of it seems right? Because no one pays for the subway I see anymore, and does that echo to other stuff? I don't know, but do you think it's an important concept in a way?
It's an important concept because it's basically urban fabric and civil society as we know it. Yeah. Now, you might have to call it something else. Look, George Kelling and James Q. Wilson did not invent the concept. I knew George Kelling. I was probably the last person to interview him before he passed away. I took a class from him at Harvard. Yeah. I mentioned him, this sounds awfully like Jane Jacobs in Death and Life of Great American Cities. And his eyes lit up and he said, of course, we're restating her ideas. These are not new concepts. Yeah. Ultimately, it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's just rephrasing it. When James Q. Wilson died, George Kelling said, maybe the good thing about broken windows is it gave police the excuse to do what the public wanted them to do all along, which was maintain order, help create a civil society, understand that ultimately it's society itself that has to police itself, but police can certainly play a big role in that.
Yeah.
John Miller, from CNN.
Sure. Yeah.
He makes a very good point about broken windows, which is misunderstood then, it's misunderstood now. It's not, first of all, it's not zero tolerance policing. It became that. If you're arresting someone for walking between subway cars, that you have to ask, what's the goal?
Correct. Yeah.
When broken windows is a problem-solving tool, well, where are robbers getting on the subway? Why don't we enforce turnstile jumping there for the purpose of catching those robbers? John Miller said, you can take care of the little things, and the big things aren't going to take care of themselves. To put it in his words, like fuck they will.
Yeah.
Robbers are going to keep robbing if there's graffiti on the subway or not. And we know that because we got graffiti off the subways by 1986, and robberies kept going up. But that doesn't mean it wasn't good to clean the subways. Like, broken windows can be good for its own sake, because I don't want someone pissing on my stoop. I don't care what that leads to.
Yeah.
It's just about trying to get through your day without the unexpected happening. But what broken windows allowed was it gave police a legal, a constitutional, even an ethical reason to legally stop people, many of whom were doing very bad things. I mean, when they did start stopping turnstile jumping, look, if you didn't have a warrant out and you didn't have a gun or drugs on you, you were given a ticket.
Yeah.
It was still a couple hours. You might, still a pain in the ass. But you weren't thrown into Rikers. But 1 in 8 people did have a warrant or contraband on them, or a gun. And so, in a way, that was just low-hanging fruit.
But that expanded to stop and frisk, right?
Yeah, the time frame, though, was later. Stop and frisk kind of went haywire around 2004, under Bloomberg and Kelly's second term as police commissioner.
And that's important to remember, that this was actually post-Giuliani, and it's kind of, drunk on the success of the previous years. So let's just turn this up a little more and do something like
Well,
stop and frisk.
also, I mean, some other people in back from the Brink. I mean, I should state for everyone who's going to go out and read read my book, but it's from the police officer's perspective by and large. It's not me putting out numbers. It's them talking about what they did, and they kind of ran out of ideas. And once they started, we really don't know how many people cops stopped back in the 90s because they were not keeping accurate. There was a form, but you weren't filling it out because nobody cared. Yeah. Once they started keeping accurate data, which was in the early 2000s, then police suddenly had this number they could quantify, and it became good for its own sake. And so,
But is there something to that? There's the kind of the moneyballization of things, where we heard a lot about CompStat, this kind of supercomputer that is putting little dots on a map, which you could do previously, but just more manually, and saying this is a hot zone here, we should flood that zone, and maybe not so much over here, which of course then gives rise to these claims of racialized policing and punishing certain neighborhoods. But is there some truth to the fact that doing it in the Billy Bean way, just using numbers, changed things significantly in New York or any other city in the U.S.?
Yeah, good policing is very hard to quantify.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you're trying to have no crime. How do you how do you quantify crimes prevented? As a researcher, I like using murder and shooting numbers, not because they're the only things that matter, though they matter a lot. It's just because I trust them. Yeah. I don't trust the numbers on other crimes. Yeah. And I'm not even talking about intentionally cooking the books, which can happen. I just mean the normal vagrancies of numbers come in and move down. Most crime isn't reported. That kind of issue. But when they started counting stops as a productivity measure, everything went haywire. And it wasn't...
Because it incentivized people in the wrong way.
Yeah. The idea was, how many people have you touched? Yeah. And not always in a good way.
Yeah.
The thing about CompStat, though, and of course comp is in the name, but all it was moving the department from physical pin maps and overhead projectors to like a PowerPoint presentation.
So it wasn't that different?
No, I mean, the technology was just a batch file spreadsheet.
Yeah.
What was important is, first of all, they started gathering the numbers quickly. So they wanted to, it was an accountability tool. It said, we are going to hold you accountable for the crime that happens. If you're the precinct commander, you tell us what you need, and now you solve the problems. And you have to figure out what those problems are. And if you don't solve them, you better have a plan B, or you're going to get demoted and be forced to retire, basically.
Yeah.
But the short version of the crime drop was a mission statement, which is, when Giuliani became mayor, he appointed Bratton. Bratton brings in his lieutenant from the old transit police department that used to be separate, and Bratton ran that a few years prior. And Jack Maple's the guy's name, and he's known as a character. And he's a tough guy to interview because he passed away in 2001, but I got access to 40 hours of Jack Maple tapes from the guy who co-wrote his autobiography.
And if you don't know Jack Maple, by the way, just do a Google image search. I mean, he's quite a character.
Yeah, and so Jack Maple comes in '94 and says, how many people were shot last year in New York City? And nobody knew. And he's like, what do you... Because it doesn't go to the uniform crime reports in the FBI. It's not a Part 1 crime. And he said, look, I mean, so in 1990, we still don't know how many people were shot in New York City. It was probably close to 7,000.
7,000 people shot.
In 1 year. But we don't know. That's my guess.
2,300 you said killed, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to hide bodies, so it's hard to fudge those statistics. But the number of people shot go off into the night.
Yeah, so there are more than 5,000 people shot. So Jack Maple says, let's count. Go there and figure, I want to know how many people were shot last month, and I want to know how many people were shot last year. And he gets that data, and so we have shooting data in New York City that goes back to 1993. But I mean, really, that was the state of the police department. They weren't focused on preventing crime. They were focused on corruption. They were focused on race riots. They were focused on scandal, brutality, but they weren't focused on crime, and that's what changed.
Wait, if they're focused on corruption, scandal, brutality, they're looking inwards, right? I mean, they're looking at themselves. You have, in the 1970s, everyone knows Frank Serpico. Those people who don't know this, Michael Dowd in the 75th precinct, who I had, who I interviewed not long after he got out of prison.
Really?
And was quite. He's a big Trump guy now, by the way.
He's a bad man.
Was that?
I said he's a bad man.
He's a bad man. He's a bad man. And if anybody wants, I'll give a movie recommendation.
And he's charismatic as hell. And that makes
charismatic guy. There is a documentary called The 7-5 that is about the 75th precinct, which is Brownsville, East New York kind of area, and about the corruption scandal and all of the people involved in it. And it is astonishing. It is incredible. And you realize, this is how crooked these people were at the time. One of the reasons that Michael Dowd got caught is he kept on forgetting to pick up his paycheck, because the paycheck was, he's making, 20 grand a year. Yeah. And then he mistakenly drives to the precinct in a Corvette. This is the type of corruption, stupid, lazy. And the police force is, to your point, and this is, ending in a question, is that CompStat is basically, okay, we're doing it, we're translating it over here to a computer. Jack Maple says, Jesus, we don't even know how many fucking people are getting shot. Is the big, coming back from the brink, is that big dive in crime in some ways just the police doing basic stuff that they hadn't been doing, that we now take for granted that a police department in a big city should do?
Yeah. And it makes it harder today, because all the low-hanging fruit of crime reduction improvement has kind of happened in that era. Yeah. I mean, one of the big things he said is we don't have anybody working nights or weekends. Well, criminals are working nights and weekends.
Mostly.
But all the specialized units were kind of working, 10 to 6. And so we changed that. Now, that's a huge deal if you're used to working Monday through Friday, 10 to 6, and suddenly you're, working 10 p.m. to 6
but it's not a sexy story in any way. This is how.
That's sexy if you like this stuff.
It is.
But it is one of the challenges as a writer. How do you write about paperwork in a way that's interesting? Yeah. It took sometimes days to book people after an arrest. Mm-hmm. How are you going to do that in a better way? So it's organizational change, and it is hard work. But first, you have to want to change it, and you have to say what the goal is. The irony is, by focusing on crime prevention, and also, they were not tolerant of corruption, but they did make the police. There was basically no large police department scandal from the year that Bratton came in, which was the old scandal, the Dirty 30, and there was a lot of legacy scandals in the works till recently under the Adams administration. That's a long time for an organization with tens of thousands of employees.
And also, we have a mayor that was a cop. He was an NYPD cop. I'm noticing a change in your body right when I said he was a cop. You twitched a little bit.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Did you notice that? No. I suspect I made more arrests in 20 months in Baltimore than he did in his whole career.
He was like a cop in name only sort of thing, a cop to run for mayor?
I can't put motivations in his head. I will say this, and I don't know if... I met him at I think it was after the 2015 riots in Baltimore, because I was on a radio show, and he was there. He was Brooklyn Borough president. Mm-hmm. I'm 4 years into working on this book, even back then. The first interview was done in 2011. And I was talking to him afterwards, and I don't remember what led up to it, because this is 10 years ago now, but I remember saying, wait, you don't think police had anything to do with the crime decline in the 90s? And he said, no. I go, that's interesting. Anyway, I arranged to interview him for the book, and, he was busy man running the borough of Brooklyn, and it got postponed and rescheduled, got postponed again, and I was like, screw it, I don't need this guy. Anyway, so he's not in the book.
Becomes mayor, yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, and now, look, we're in a situation now where...
but let me tell you really why he twitched.
Yeah.
It's because he brought corruption into the top ranks of the NYPD.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's gotten better now with Commissioner Tisch, but I mean, you had the former police commissioner's brother is an identical twin of the police commissioner going around basically impersonating the police commissioner with a police detail. And it wasn't that it wasn't reported, but like, my God, if that's not the big scandal of the year.
No, it was reported mostly in the New York Post and maybe the Daily News. It's a sort of tabloid.
The New York Times doesn't do
New York Times
local
didn't do much
reporting anymore.
But it is a pretty outrageous scandal.
I mean, it's an amusing one, just from a spectator level. He's doing what? And then he's going down to nightclubs and getting money from them. I mean, this is the police commissioner's identical twin brother. Wow.
The other option now, I mean, we can keep it in the present just for a minute, because, I mean, not only have you sort of done the reporting and done the research and this stuff, but you've actually lived it as a cop. When you have Zoran Mamdani as the presumptive mayor of New York, I mean, I will say that, and Eric Adams, who's going to come in as a sort of independent or something and try to dislodge him. And Mamdani is, he's a defund the police guy. He actually said stuff fairly recently that was pretty much not like 2020 stuff. Well, that was then. It was a very passionate moment, and we've backed away from it. There's some stuff from December of 2024 that it looks as if he doesn't have the same attitude towards the police as, I would say, previous mayors, even de Blasio. Does it worry you in any way?
I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but look, de Blasio was pretty roundly hated by cops. Not by Bratton, interesting. Bratton has decent things to say about de Blasio, but de Blasio was much more of a traditional progressive politician who joined the sort of defund police bandwagon. And the NYPD was defunded. It's funny how history is so quickly rewritten. What worries me about Mamdani is it's more ideological. It's at the core. I mean, I read the DSA party platform. Now, maybe he doesn't believe that stuff, but then I want to hear him talk about it. Yeah. Now, I also follow the police and criminal justice side more. The mayor of New York does not have that much power by most mayor standards compared to other cities. But the mayor does appoint the Department of Corrections commissioner. We've got this Rikers deadline that can't be met coming up. We could just let half of them out, which that's an option. Or we have to change the law. That's harder work. And the mayor appoints the police commissioner. The mayor could destroy the NYPD if he or she were so inclined. And I'm afraid that he is inclined because he doesn't see that. He sees policing as bad, as part of the carceral state and systemic oppression. So if you can hamper that, if I assume quality of life enforcement will end. He wants to put homeless services in the subway. And all you need, if you cut the police department budget 15%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but then you've got to lay off cops because more than 90% of the budget goes to labor. Is the city council going to step up? Like, they've sort of been relying on a mayoral veto until now. So yeah, I see a path that could be disastrous. Let's hope I'm wrong.
And you've written about this extensively, but you haven't been uncritical of policing. I mean, you've been very critical in certain ways and certain capacities. And what do you sort of make of that moment that was clearly reactive to the George Floyd situation? And people like to go very, very far. It's COVID, and you get the most press by saying, let's defund the police. Well, we didn't really mean that. And then the New York Times has a headline, no, we actually did mean that, defund the police. But like that movement and
everywhere it happened, violence skyrocketed, including New York.
Yeah, and you think that was as a result of that kind of moment, that movement? What do you think?
It was also the criminal. Well, it wasn't. It was related to COVID. Look, the courts, shut down basically. The whole criminal justice system stopped. But crime didn't go up with COVID. It went up after the riots. It went up with civil disorder, and we've seen that kind of thing time and time again. America's the only place where crime went up during COVID.
Is that right?
Yeah. It was a uniquely American phenomenon, and it synced exactly with at the end of May
Yeah.
2020. Professionally, I was depressed because I then, I wasn't, let's just say from my policing days till then, it was 20 years. And yeah, I've been very critical of policing. And we in that field were working hard, and whatever small part I played in that, but policing had gotten better by pretty much any standard you want to judge it by, including cops shooting unarmed people. Crime was going down. It was incremental, but every year everything was trending good, and then it all went to hell. And the issue was no longer, the critics did not want to make policing better. They wanted to end policing. And then I don't, quite frankly, then I don't want you to have a seat at the table of police reform. And you see this with, they call it, Cop City. Well, it's police training. Do we want to train cops or not? Humorously, they tried or succeeded in getting rid of Paw Patrol because it was a positive portrayal of policing. Well, do we want people to go into the field or not?
Unless anyone at home thinks that's like some division of the NYPD, the Paw Patrol, it's literally a cartoon show for kids.
Yeah.
And they took the show Cops, off the air, too, when it was running in syndication in certain places because it seemed to be a positive. But also to point out,
by the way, if you watch, I was a Cops TV show fan before I became a cop.
Yeah.
It's just filled with cops doing bad, not criminally bad, just bad policing. Because if you do policing right, it's kind of boring. Something's got to happen.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, the YouTube channels that I've recommended, and this says a lot about me, I shouldn't say that it's recommended, but these ones that are just body cam, my daughter is 14, and she keeps being fed these things, and she's watching body cam videos of police like shooting someone running through the street with a hatchet in their hand. So it might come off of television, but it was displaced onto YouTube, so people like to watch that content. But this idea that policing was the problem, and to be very clear, as you just said, I don't think it was without an enormous number of problems. I mean, choking people out and killing them for selling loosies and things like this. These are bad scenes, and it's bad policing, and it should be fought at every stop. But at the same time, I used to do this kind of test with people after the George Floyd thing and just ask them how many unarmed people, or unarmed white people, or unarmed black people were shot and killed the previous year by police. And you see a lot of these studies. The numbers are sometimes 10,000. And it
depends where you fall on the political
correct.
spectrum.
And the true number was like 19 or 20 that year. And even those, a lot of those are kind of vague.
Michael, there was a moral panic.
Yeah,
there was a grain
panic.
of truth, and then the world.
A grain of truth and a hideous thing to watch, the death of George Floyd. But it went crazy, didn't it?
Yeah, and that's, I don't know. Like it was a very strange situation because I say, well, this is, you're not going to make friends by saying this isn't a problem.
Yeah.
But what you can say is, where you're protesting, like New York City, especially at the time, was arguably the best large police department in America. Again, I'm not saying that to be rah-rah. I'm saying you pick whatever, however you want to analyze it, and it was happening better. Cops were shooting fewer people, less crime, fewer arrests, fewer complaints, everything.
Majority minority police
Minority police department. Go look at some sheriff's department somewhere. Like all the attention was focused generally on the police departments to do better. There were huge regional variations among the number of people cops shot. There still are.
Yeah.
New York is a fraction of the national average. Other places are many-fold above it. If the goal is to reduce the number of people, or even specifically black people that cops shoot, why don't we actually go figure out where it's the problem and try to make it better? Yeah. But there was no desire to propagate best practices. It really was a cops are bad. Let's F them.
The crime drop in New York City, how much credit should we give to Rudy Giuliani, who is now, because of this late period in his life, his last act, is not somebody who anyone wants to give any credit to at all, which I completely understand, myself included, because he seems to have completely lost the plot. But if you were to go back and sort of be neutral about it and forget about who Giuliani became, was he instrumental in the crime drop?
Yes and no. Look, he was mayor.
Yeah.
That matters. He appointed Bratton. That matters.
Yeah.
And for a brief period of less than 2 years, let's keep in mind, they were on the same side. I mean, Giuliani fired Bratton very quickly
Yeah.
because there were two large egos in that room, and Bratton had his picture on the cover of Time magazine, and Giuliani didn't like that. Louis Anemone, chief of department, he said that was, back when Giuliani was just crazy. He wasn't crazy. He was probably the right mayor for the time.
Yeah.
He was a more effective mayor than Dinkins, and and the New York Times enthusiastically endorsed him for re-election.
You reproduce that in this book, the editorial, or part of the editorial, that the New York Times is endorsing Giuliani.
And I just saw Ruth Messenger, who he was running against,
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
yesterday, talking about Mandami. And
Yeah.
she reminds me of Dinkins in many ways. It seems like she's like a great person and
Yeah.
a role model, and she was not a good Manhattan borough president back then.
But my friend, is this wrong? And I know you know I think probably I would say our mutual friend. I think that you're friends with Nick Gillespie from Reason Magazine, who always liked to point out to me that crime started dropping under Dinkins and not necessarily,
Yeah.
so we should pay attention to that and not give all the credit to Giuliani.
Yes, certain things did happen under Dinkins that were very important. The squeegee men were eliminated under Dinkins, which no one seems to know. Dinkins got, what's the tourist name? Brian Watkins, a tourist from Utah got killed protecting his family on the subway. And that led to the famous Dave Do Something headline in presumably the New York Post.
Yeah.
Might have been the Daily News. Anyway, and Dave did. And he, along with Peter Vallone Sr., the city council president, they got Safe Streets, Safe City passed, and that hired a massive number of police officers. That was, Dinkins doing.
Yeah.
So he did that. He had the misfortune to be there when crack peaked, and then it went down. Murders peaked in 1990, but there were still more murders at the end of Dinkins' term than there were before, the year he was elected. So arguably that was not a great victory. But, the crack epidemic receded, and that, I think, was something that benefited him.
Yeah.
Crime fell off the table in 94, and specifically in August of 94. And the fact that you can pinpoint it to such a specific month even, is revealing, and also says, no, it wasn't lead, it wasn't legalized abortion.
Things like that, yeah.
It wasn't ending poverty. Poverty went up.
Yeah.
Giuliani slashed social programs during this time, and violence plummeted.
So what was it about August of 94?
It is when they tweaked CompStat every week, and it's when they started focusing on the level of individual officer, and they noticed that half of all cops were making 0 arrests, and they said, let's get them back in the game as well.
Yeah.
And so there was more pressure to actually, because it's an interesting job because it's tough to get fired, it's civil service, and if you don't
Strong
work,
union,
you can't get in trouble.
Yeah.
So you had to motivate these cops, both with carrots and sticks, to
But
get
this
into
wasn't
this
these
stuff.
bad incentives, though, telling people to get out there and
No, this was saying, listen, let's remember why you went on this job.
Yeah.
There's a nobility to it. You took an oath. We're gonna support you if you do the right thing.
Yeah.
And it was one of probably the brief periods in which morale was actually high in a police department.
Before we take some questions from listeners, viewers, let me ask you something related, but you've been asked it a million times before, but I'm always interested in the answer, is that you went to Princeton. Your father was a very well-known sociologist, wrote a very well-known book about Greek Americans, right? You have an academic background. You became a Baltimore cop. Why?
For my PhD research.
It was the research.
Yeah, I started grad school in 95. The reason back from the Brink was...
But you can go and be the pointy-headed guy, wearing his blazer with the patches and, ride along in the car.
A little bit. That was
carrying the gun.
That
right?
was the initial plan. And then
Yeah.
once I got to Baltimore, they said, this is crazy. You can't do that.
And you said, what a shithole.
No, well, it was
That's
politics.
me about this, not Peter.
It was the Greek-American
Baltimore.
connection.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So they said yes, but then the commissioner who approved my plan was out. He went to the Clinton administration, and the acting commissioner, my paperwork came across his desk, and he just said, no way. And I met with him in khaki uniforms, but I was not hired. I was just a participant observer. I was the pointy-headed academic. And he said, "Why don't you want to become a cop for real?" And I said, well, first, it wasn't the plan, but I said, who's going to hire me knowing I'm going to quit after a year, though I stayed a bit longer, and write a book about it? And I think he just had sympathy. Because I said, look, if I go back to Harvard, I'm a failure. Like, I don't have a place to live. I just moved here. Yeah. And so I went through the hiring process while I was in the academy. And I mean, in hindsight, that was a fabulous twist of fate, but it was not very pleasant at the time.
Did you enjoy it in any way?
Yeah, it's not the best job I've ever had. It's not the worst. I like the camaraderie. I like the drinking after work. I did like the sense of being on the side of good. Yeah. But at some point, it was very tiring to tell the same drug dealers to get off the same corner night after night and know that ultimately the place was not going to be better than you found it.
Did you learn anything that surprised you? I mean, obviously you're going to be learning things if you're a cop in Baltimore, and you were previously doing graduate work at Harvard. I mean, what was the thing that you took away from that and said, well, I didn't see that one coming. I didn't expect that.
I knew very little about. I did some police research in Amsterdam before. That was my introduction to policing. I don't come from a cop background. Both my parents were teachers. You learn tremendously, and you learn quickly there. But you learn both about policing. You learn about the neighborhood, which people probably know best from The Wire, from David Simon's show. So I probably learned more in those 2 years than anywhere else. So. But at the time, I thought my book was going to be about the great Baltimore crime drop, which didn't happen. It seemed like it was our time. A guy, Eddie Norris, came from New York to become police commissioner. Murders went down a little bit, but not the success that you had elsewhere, which Baltimore might be seeing now, which is nice. Yeah. But I don't know. I still look back fondly to it. But I also, I started to see little signs of burnout after a brief time. Yeah. And you have a cop in back from the Brink who says everybody should be a cop for 2 years, which I thought was, we seemed to be quite serious about this. What you learn about the community, what you learn about, the problems that beset a city. And I was like, that'd be also terrible if most of the people I knew were cops. Well, how about cop?
But I like the instinct of it,
Yeah, how about cop or paramedic or something that gets you out of the class bubble that you grew up with. Yeah. We were earlier, before you started talking, we were talking about Jimmy Breslin and the old police beat reporters. This goes all the way back to H.L. Mencken in Baltimore. But reporters today, if there is a police beat, they don't know any cops. They don't know anybody who does. It's a segregated world. I'm not talking about race, but I'm talking about class and culture. I'll say another thing I learned in Baltimore. It was the first time I got to know and I'm still friends with, pickup truck driving, hunting, flag waving Republicans. Yeah. I just didn't grow up in that world. And I think that's benefited me to know, to know people are really diverse across the political spectrum. Policing is a conservative institution. Now, black and Hispanic cops are more likely to be Democrats, but it is very conservative. So, I was known as the crazy liberal guy, but whatever, you get teased a bit, but I enjoyed talking politics, and I still do enjoy talking to cops. That's bank my career on, right?
But isn't that's probably true across the board when it comes to both political reporting, too? The number of people that I know and have worked with in the world of political journalism who have, met a Republican, and it was Charlie Kirk, and have never met a Republican in the wild, or when they went to, this used to happen all the time.
J School killed journalism.
I say this all the time. We had somebody call in and I recommended, they said, I'm going to go to journalism school. I was like, don't go to journalism school. But you go to a Trump rally and be in the press pen with everyone, and Trump would do the performative, the enemy of the people kind of stuff, and everyone boos you. And I would see all those people leave together, whereas the job that I had to go film with them. I had to go shoot and talk to them and everything. And they were all really interesting people, but everybody else was just, the people that were writing what Trump was saying and then describing the scene and then getting the hell out of there. And that's, generally a problem. And I think it was a huge problem also with policing and around the time of George Floyd, of the idea of race and racial dynamics in cities, particularly when it came to cops. People were shocked when there was, you'd say there were 19 people that were unarmed, black men that were killed. And then you break that down even further, and discover that, you know,
3 of them were bashing the cop with a rocket.
exactly, and one of them had a fake, and you know, a lot of those cops that are doing the shooting themselves are black. I mean, so you get, the numbers get smaller and smaller. And then you read a book like this, and this is when I do the thing that he didn't tell me to do this. I'm just saying, buy the book. Oxford University Press, you know, it's clever. But you realize in a chapter about Crown Heights now, to people who live in New York, is a neighborhood that you could live in. Crown Heights, to me, when I was growing up, was the scene of anti-Jewish riots, Bensonhurst, an Italian neighborhood, anti-black. Al Sharpton was not a host on MSNBC. He was wearing a medallion and, you know, track pants and inciting people against the diamond merchants. Good Lord. Amazing how you can recover and get an MSNBC show after that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I took away from this book that is not an explicit thing that you're saying, but is just how much better race relations are. Because it was absolutely insane that we regularly, not regularly, but enough to be that I remember a lot of this stuff, had race riots and racially tinged X, Y, and Z. People fighting about this stuff in both in politics, and you know, I posted a clip of when I was promoting the show today on Twitter of Al Sharpton and Roy Innis fighting on the Morton Downey Jr. show in Harlem in response to a question that was asked by Stanley Crouch. And if you don't know any of those names, go Google them all, and that is New York and the racial politics of New York in a nutshell in the 1980s and 90s.
I don't want to say I focus too many words on Crown Heights, but there's a lot on Crown Heights, in part because the cops who eventually did, after 3 days, end the riots, rose in the ranks and became some of the major players in the NYPD. But also, Dinkins was elected on part to soothe racial tensions in the city, and he failed. He failed miserably at that. Yeah. Crown Heights was followed by Washington Heights. And so that, I mean, the one thing he was supposed to be good at. And personally, again, I like the guy. I mean, I know he's no longer with us, but that was where the city woke up one day and said, there is a pogrom going on in Crown Heights right now. What the hell is going on, and why are we letting it happen? And there's an interesting backstory about by sheer chance, like the police department had nobody in charge at that specific moment, but they were paralyzed to do the wrong thing. And it also showed that once you do actually get back, and there's so many reasons it shouldn't happen, from the motorcade being given and the car that killed the kid, and the nature of the injuries. It was the perfect storm of all that stuff. But it did really, the city was going down in flames, literally. Yeah,
and you had neighborhoods that then were sort of shorthand for race riots and now don't have anymore. I mean, Bensonhurst, Howard Beach.
Yeah, I grew up with those. That was...
Crown Heights. And if you look at these people that committed some of these crimes, like these young Italian-American kids, and you look at the marches through those neighborhoods, and there's video of this stuff online. It's absolutely fascinating to watch. And by the way, the Wall Street Journal did a very, very good documentary that is on YouTube. It's like a 25-minute documentary about Crown Heights. But if you look at these Italian-American kids who are out there dropping N-bombs, marching through in like the late 80s, early 90s, and you look at any of these guys now who are probably out in the middle of Long Island, if not some of them are in jail, in New Jersey, and say, there's no ethnic politics left in your neighborhood. Your neighborhood is mostly Chinese immigrants and, a mixture of other people. And you were defending that neighborhood against the black kids that were coming in from this neighborhood. It's like, it's so insane to think about now. And I think that's one of the most positive developments.
Let's not also forget Billy Gorto's, he's from Rossdale, the ass end of Queens, as he called it. Yeah. And he points out that, we, meaning white people, not him personally, we were still firebombing black homes in the 70s long after the South gave it up. It was... those are things I learned because I didn't grow up in New York City. Yeah. Sharpton does not come off so well in my book because the cops I spoke to generally don't like him.
And he shouldn't have come off well.
But I will say, he did confront. He brought protests into the neighborhoods like Bensonhurst and so on, and that was a new tactic that hadn't been done, and maybe it needed to be done.
It was right in that instance for sure.
And I'll say this, that the accountability to some extent that he put on the NYPD, I think, made the NYPD better. Yeah. No matter his motives and even no matter his tactics. But there was someone ready to criticize policing, and policing had to answer for that. So I do think that's part of what creates a better police department, are critics.
Yeah. Al Sharpton never apologized for Tawana Brawley.
Yeah, that's not right.
And I don't believe he ever apologized to Stephen Pagonis, the assistant district attorney, I think, who was accused of assaulting her. All right, let's get to people out there in internet world. And I believe we have Yale up first. And I will pretend at this point to have never met her and do not know who she is. But Yale, how are you?
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hi, I know you too. Wait a second.
Well, it's a question from you because you worked for the NYPD at some point, right?
Yeah, I posted something in the chat, and then the producer was like, do you want to come on?" I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
Um, hi. I just wanted to say, well, and I do actually have a question. But I wanted to say, you talked about the defunding the NYPD in 2021. That was a real thing. Like that was $1 billion that was cut, and an entire academy class of police officers that didn't come on the street because of Twitter. Really, I really think that's the reason, because people were getting mean tweets, and the city council is like, we need to do something because there's so many hashtags and black squares. Mm-hmm. So that had a real effect in the city. Not to mention between that and the vaccines, all the cops that decided to retire. But related to that, Pete, I'm curious to know what you think about morale. You touched on it a little bit, and recruitment, which is, I think, one of the biggest, it's almost at a crisis level, I think, around the country. Every police department that I talk to and I work with having huge recruitment and retention problems. People don't want to come on this job. It's hard to blame them. There's a guy I know who I think you might know too, who's somebody I respect a lot, who was at NYPD and then became a chief of police at a different agency. And I asked him once if he would recommend that his kid to be a cop, which is something that, used to be very, very common. And he said, "This city doesn't deserve my kid."
Do you believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you worked in public affairs for the NYPD? Is that right?
I was a director of social media.
A director of social media. Do you suspect, in the people that you talk to and the cops that you know, that it's hard to recruit and retention is difficult just because of that, what you're talking about, the social media stuff and the reaction to cops? And, if you think your life is in danger and you want to go home to your kids, one decision you make to protect yourself could end up in you going to prison or being maligned online. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be if they're bad cops, but that being the kind of worry, right, that hangs over some people.
Yeah, and a lot of people who come on the job, it's not necessarily their lifelong dream to be police officers. Some of them it is, but a lot of them are like, well, I could be a firefighter, I could work for sanitation, I could go back to school. There are options, especially people who want to go into government work. Yeah. And all these options just sound a lot better, and they pay, sometimes just as well, and the same benefits. So, and maybe if I can tack on another question to that is like, do you see a difference between like post George Floyd cops, like cops that came on after 2020, than cops that came up before? Because I really do, but I've probably talked to less cops than you did. But I did a ride along in Kansas City once with two cops who came on after 2020. And I was like, they were so by the book to the point where I thought they weren't necessarily doing justice to the people they were working with, because they were just like really concerned with covering their ass. And I, can't blame them.
Peter, on that, let me tag on a small thing to that question too, is that very similar, is that, policing for a lot of years was, offensive policing, going in to say, let's make sure things don't happen. Whereas it seems now, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, that it's mostly people responding to calls and going where people are calling them, rather than people going in to be as a kind of prophylactic measure. To Yale's question, is that something that you've seen after the kind of 2020 thing, and a sort of difference in the way police officers handle policing?
Policing for a year became completely reactive.
Yeah.
And you can quantify that, and now that we see a lot of places, including New York, murders are down, Baltimore, they're down, and you see it, and arrests are, I hate using arrests as a measure of good policing, because the same way that stops became But as a proxy measure, I don't know what else we're going to use. The police are getting back in the game, so we do see that happening. And of course, we want policing as a verb. We want, yeah, you could just take reports. You could just do it by the book, but that's not the oath you swore to uphold. But you do, you know, I joke that when I was a cop, you know, at least I had to mess up to get into trouble. What terrifies cops is they could do everything right and still get in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's new. But I also want to point out retention is not a problem everywhere. I just spoke to the Florida Sheriff's Association, which is and it was kind of eye-opening to me to see sheriffs who are elected don't have to answer to a mayor and are very conservative. Not all of them. There's 67 counties, but as a group, it was not. I was not in New York City anymore, and they're not having a tough time recruiting. They're poaching our cops because, well, for whatever. I mean, because of politics, because of fewer taxes. So it is by and large the cities that have seen the most protests against policing that are having the toughest time. And, you know, just to go back to that idea of even if you don't like cops, don't you want them to be better?
Yeah.
You see in like certain progressive politicians and DSA platform, they actively say we want to get rid of program like the Police Athletic League because it presents police in a favorable light. I mean, yeah, what a horrible thing to do. I notice among my undergraduate students, there are fewer that want to become cops because, look, if you're 22 years old, or not even that old, if you're 20 years old, your formative years have been in what I'm hoping is a blip to history of this moral panic, anti-policing, craze that took over. Why would you want to join an institution that's bad, that's evil? So that is a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, just to end on this, there's so many weird misconceptions. Cards on the table. I mean, I have an Irish last name, so obviously I come from kind of a cop family. My grandfather was a cop. And the toughest job he had was to do a police escort of the Beatles to their show at Suffolk Downs in Boston in 1963. So it was not the toughest job in the world for him at the time. But one of the things that we don't think about, and I always encourage people to think of the broader sense of how this stuff operates rather than just having a kind of protest vision of these things that defunding the police will make everybody safer and happier. One of the things about that is often overlooked, and there is a very good book about this. So if you're buying Peter Moskos' book, you should also buy this book. And I don't remember the author, but it's called Black Silent Majority. It's an academic, I think might actually be an academic at Harvard, that is just making the simple case that some of this policing, a lot of this policing, was a response to people in the black community who want safety in their community. The disparity in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, the impetus for a lot of that stuff was the Congressional Black Caucus, people like Charlie Rangel, and said, hey, this is absolutely destroying our neighborhood and you people don't care. We need to sentence this in a different way because it's actually destroying us. And then later that's forgotten about. So don't take the people who are the victims of crime and around the victims of crime for granted, because they are the ones that are more interested in policing than you are sitting on the Upper East Side and writing position papers.
Yeah, I'll go a step further and say, look, if you personally don't like cops, like that's your business in a way.
Sure.
But don't impose that beliefs on other people who do. The anti-policing movement does, by and large, come from wealthy white people.
People who need cops a lot less than other people.
Yeah, or can't imagine that there really are some criminals doing some bad things. Yeah. Poll after poll shows that black Americans want more policing more than white Americans. Yeah. If you don't want policing in your neighborhood, look, my city council woman's an abolitionist, so maybe we should try that. I don't want to because I live in that neighborhood in Queens. But don't do it to other people. There's something that's really horrible about that. Now, black Americans also want better policing more than white Americans do. Yeah. But there's no question that policing is essential, and it is neighborhoods that are victimized by crime more that really, that see that the most.
Peter Moskos, the book is back from the Brink inside the NYPD in New York City's extraordinary 1990s crime drop. Absolutely fascinating stuff. I'm fascinated with this period, and I learned a ton from this. And I was just trying to remember one of these crazy things that I learned. Oh, it was at the beginning, this ambush at the Nation of Islam Mosque. You can read about it, go buy the book, but I had no idea about this, and it's totally fascinating.
The old one or the second one?
The first one you start the book with,
okay.
when they don't even arrest the people. It's a great story, an interesting story, and it tells you a lot about the period and what the city was like then. So thanks for joining us. Go buy Peter's book and make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of this show, The Moynihan Report. And we'll see you Tuesdays, Thursdays, same old time, 7 o'clock. And, just on YouTube. So we'll see you soon.